In World War II, the skies over the Pacific were more than just air and clouds. They were a battlefield where only the fastest reactions determined who would live to see another sunrise. There was no mercy in the blue above the Solomon Islands, only hunters and prey. In those early years, the Japanese Mitsubishi Zero ruled those skies like a silent predator. Its turn radius was unmatched. Its agility was legendary. American pilots quickly learned a harsh reality. Once a Zero got onto your tail, the odds of escaping were nearly zero. Meanwhile, the American Lockheed P-38 Lightning was a different kind of beast. With its twin engines, long wings, and heavy frame, it looked powerful, and it was. But power alone didn't win dogfights. Not when a lighter, more agile enemy could fly circles around you. Pilots respected the Lightning for its speed and firepower, but against the Zero, it was simply too slow to respond. Every hesitation, every split-second delay in the controls could turn a proud fighter into helpless metal plunging into the sea. Pilots complained about the same issue over and over. When we pull the stick back, nothing happens for a moment that costs battles, a moment that costs lives. A delay of even a fraction of a second is fatal when the enemy is right behind you, guns blazing. The U.S. command knew there was a problem. Engineers in California were working tirelessly to improve the systems, but the improvements weren't arriving quickly enough. Out in the islands, pilots were dying every week. Some never made it back from their first mission. Then came a quiet act of rebellion, hidden beneath grease-stained hands and forgotten paperwork. A single mechanic, whose name is mostly lost to history, refused to watch that tragedy continue. He wasn't an engineer with fancy calculations. He wasn't in charge of designing aircraft. He was just a man with a wrench, a toolbox, and the determination to stop seeing his friends vanish into the ocean. He studied the P-38 closely. He examined the long mechanical cables that ran from the cockpit to the tail control surfaces. Those cables were the nerves of the aircraft, the direct connection between the pilot's will and the airplane's response. But during tight dogfighting maneuvers, the structure of the aircraft twisted and flexed slightly under load. That flexing caused micro-slack in the cables, tiny looseness, barely visible, but disastrous in combat. That slack created a deadly delay between the pilot pulling the controls and the elevator actually responding. The mechanic asked himself, "How do I remove that slack?" He didn't need a blueprint to find a solution. He needed only a simple piece of stiff piano wire. He installed this little wire illegally inside one aircraft. No paperwork, no permission, no applause. To those who saw it, it looked stupid, unprofessional, a small joke inside a giant war machine. But the mechanic believed in it. He wiped his hands, looked at the plane, and hoped he had just saved a life. The next morning, a young pilot named Lieutenant Robert Hayes climbed into that very P-38. He didn't know anything had been changed. There was no warning, no speech, no explanation. Engines roared to life. Propellers blurred into motion. The Lightning leapt into the air. Minutes later, the enemy found him. 3 Zeros screamed down from above, launching a deadly ambush. Hayes pulled back on the control wheel, expecting the usual delay. But this time, there was none. The P-38 snapped into a turn with lightning-fast obedience. The aircraft that once felt heavy and stubborn suddenly moved like it had been reborn. Hayes rolled sharply, reversed direction, and for the first time, a Lightning outturned the legendary Zero. The hunter became the hunted. Hayes lined up his guns, 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, focused on the first Zero. A second later, the Japanese fighter disappeared in a ball of flame. The second Zero tried to follow its usual escape dance, but Hayes stayed glued to its tail, firing until it spun into the sea. The third Zero, stunned by the impossible performance of the P-38, fled. Hayes returned to base victorious and very confused. He jumped out of the cockpit laughing, shouting, I don't know what you did to my plane, but do it again. Mechanics looked at each other. The secret was out. Word spread like wildfire across the squadron. Pilots who had once flown with fear now begged, "Put the wire in mine too." It wasn't just a modification anymore. It became a mission. A quiet act of defiance across the airfields. More and more Lightning fighters received the wire trick. It was never written in official manuals. No engineering documents praised its brilliance. Supervisors dismissed it as an unauthorized and unnecessary modification. They called it the stupid wire trick. But to the pilots whose lives depended on every heartbeat, it was genius. Air combat reports changed dramatically over the next weeks. P-38s began matching, even beating, the Zero's legendary turn rate. Japanese pilots who once mocked the Lightning were suddenly facing a far fiercer opponent. The U.S. fighters now responded with split-second precision. The difference between life and death had vanished. The secret success of the wire can be explained simply. When the pilot commands a turn, the signal runs from the controls, through pulleys and cables, to the tail. Any looseness in that path creates a delay. The mechanic's wire acted as a constant tension device, eliminating that looseness completely. No slack, no hesitation, no delay. Control became instant. Instant control wins dogfights. It didn't make the P-38 lighter. It didn't give it more power. It didn't install new weapons. What it gave was time, a tiny slice of a second, but just enough to turn the tide. And in combat, time is everything. Yet despite its real impact on the air war, the name of the mechanic who invented the wire trick is rarely recorded. He didn't receive a medal. He didn't gain fame. There were no speeches thanking him for his contribution. He remained just a mechanic, one of thousands, doing his best to save the men who risked their lives above the ocean. His story reminds us that history is not built only by the hands that pull the trigger. It is also shaped by the hands that tighten the bolts. Today, when visitors admire a restored P-38 Lightning in a museum, they see the powerful engines, the sleek twin booms, the dangerous guns mounted along the nose. But they cannot see the real miracle, a small hidden wire that once changed the balance of war. They cannot feel the fear of pilots waiting for takeoff, or imagine the mechanic watching their return, searching the sky for the aircraft he helped protect. War often credits generals and heroic pilots. But victory is earned by all the invisible individuals who keep the machines alive, people whose brilliance rarely reaches the front page of history. This story stands as proof. Even the simplest innovation, even the smallest detail, can alter the fate of nations. A wire that first seemed stupid turned out to be brilliant. A rule broken for the sake of saving lives brought more pilots home. A forgotten mechanic, who refused to accept defeat, gave the Lightning the edge it desperately needed. He didn't design a new plane. He didn't command a squadron. He just cared. And because he cared, the course of the Sky War changed. Quietly, without fanfare, but decisively. So let us remember this. Heroes are not only the ones who fly into danger. Sometimes, heroes are the ones who stay on the ground, so others can return safely to it. End.